this is just your introduction into governmental budgeting. And what you need to understand, once you get the government, the budget book, it will not look like it looked last year. We have a new software. Jeannie has done most of the work of putting it all in the system, because I've been dealing with bargaining, and it's been a little bumpy as she's can tell you it's, she's wanting to throw it out the window. So,
Throw it, Jeannie, just throw it.
no,
No, I'm just kidding.
don't encourage that. So. So I basically put on the front page, this is why we're here. Those kids. We all do this for what we do because of the kids. And, you know, we have two different state champions on one side, state champions on the other side, two different mechanisms, basketball and dance. Beautiful. So we see that this year. So absolutely wonderful. So what we're gonna learn, and that this year we actually had a custodian at Sacramento. He won the Employee of the Year. So it was fabulous. So all the way around, no, we're small, we're mighty. Gonna understand what local budget law is. It's not like your typical checking account, and it's not like a corporation. It runs completely different. It runs under the concept of governmental county by governmental county standards. And why do we do this training? Because usually it will help you understand completely what you're going to be reading. And when you come back on the 22nd, normally most of the questions you will have during the presentation, I will hope that I would answer them, because I tend to know where you're going to be looking at. Something not high flexibility, or something that just, as I say, doesn't smell right. Why does it look like that? Why did it go up, or why did it go down? And I try to pick those out before, so I can address them in the budget meeting on the 22nd. That will be our first meeting. And then we'll have one on, I believe, May 6th. Is that right, Kim? The following Wednesday?
It's 2 weeks after.
Okay. And I will not be here. My daughter is graduating from college in New York. So, I will try to, if I need to, be online, but if I don't need to be, I would prefer to be with my daughter, so.
I think we can manage without you.
Uh-huh.
Congratulations.
How excited.
Talk about our values and our goals and our equity lens and how we make decisions in this district. How was the budget built based on those concepts? I know we went to a meeting yesterday or the day before, and somebody says, well, why did we communicate it? Why don't I have those numbers? Why? Well, we have to make decisions. It takes time. And, if I gave a name today, tomorrow it will change. So it's not fair to put that out. We need to be done with making decisions before everything gets public. Everybody knows we have budget cuts, but other than that, that's as much as they know right now. You'll talk about the budget process from the time I start in December through the whole process, through the end of June. And like this year, we have two supplemental budgets. I did one in February, and I'll do another one in June. So budgets can be multifaceted all year round. They are complicated. We'll talk about what a revenue source, what an expenditure is versus an expense. And revenue is called resources. In our budget book, what we think of them is revenue. So what's the difference between an expenditure versus, you know, all those kind of things. And what your role is. There was an interesting meeting we had today. And there was other school districts, and they were explaining how they were trying to teach board members and the committee members what their role is. And basically, through this class, we'll understand a little bit more of what your role is. And when you get that document on the 22nd, what your role is, and helping us understand to make sure we're going the line that we said that we were going to go. Okay? We'll have budget hearing, and basically we're gonna adopt it, and we'll then you'll get to read the book. And basically, when I give you that book on the 22nd, it's not gonna be 150 pages like I normally give you. It's gonna be a lot thinner, because I'm basically at this point gonna be able to give you all the funds in their strategic way they have to be by governmental guidelines. But all the extra stuff I normally would have ready, it's not there. It will be ready before I adopt the budget, but right now, it's not. And all the other stuff is nice pictures, nice narratives, all those little stuff that make it all pretty and aesthetically pleasing. And Jeannie says, why do you need all that stuff? You can just put the numbers in there. I'm more of an aesthetic person. I know that's strange as a CPA, but I do like to make it a little bit more pretty. Okay, local budget law. There is, ORS is the guidelines that we have to go by, and that changes periodically. This last year it did not change, right? We still have to establish procedures. We have procedures in the district, how we have to do this, who has control. When we start the budget meetings on next Wednesday, it will be the first thing we have to do is elect officers. Because we need to know who has what role, and then that, from that time, they're responsible to run the board meeting. I have no control, they tell me when I can go and when Michael goes, but pretty much they look at us and then we go like this, one of the people that have been here for a while and go, yep, this is what you're supposed to say. So, it's fun to watch. Robert's Rules of Order, so much fun. In that budget book you're gonna look at, there's gonna be programs. We have programs at the high school. We have CTE, we have high school success, we have SEI, we have summer programs, we have pre-K. And they're not easy to identify in the budget, right? If you knew what code, I could tell you which special education, you look at me, oh, there should be a page that just says special education. No, special education is pretty much almost every financial page, it just has one specific code, and you would know what to look for. Right, so we're gonna give you some guidelines of what to look for. Talk about some estimates. And how we develop the estimates. And we've made some, little adjustments already this year, because when we started the budget, we were a higher number, we're a lower number, because we made some adjustments. To what we were estimating and said, we're comfortable with those. And what were those things? So we're very transparent, Michael and I and the rest of the cabinet, why we made those decisions. And are we comfortable with them, with what degree of risk? So when we talk about the budget on the 22nd, I'll go over all those assumptions of how we built the budget. You'll get one separate page that tells you exactly what are the fringe rates, how do we decide those? We're both in bargaining, why did I just dream up numbers to come up with? There's a reason, I've been doing this 25 years, some odd years. Once you get to do it as long as I am, you have a pattern that's easier for you. I really do like citizen involvement. I like to ask questions. There's a point in time that I have to be able to answer. If you can ask the questions during the time that we're doing this, that's great. That will help us in the end. Same was when we started on the 22nd. If there's something glaring, you say, Sheree, it bugs me. Just ask me the question. It's a lot easier than that. Because sometimes you may forget what you want to come back to, so. The control of spending of public funds. Pretty much my role is to make the fiduciary agent of the district, but Michael's name is the superintendent, but he doesn't manage the money every day like we do. We manage the money every day. She makes the bank transfers, does the bank reconciliation with the accountant. We work with the auditors. I don't think you've actually seen an auditor in here. Our accountant.
I mean, I've seen them, but I haven't.
Yeah. I do a better job if the superintendent stays out of that, because it's the education side, we're the finance side. And it's complicated than what the auditors want, and things change, so I try to keep them out of their warehouse. When I need to get in their warehouse, I do, but if I don't need to be there, I step back out of it, because they're the experts. Alright. If a district does not follow budget law, I don't get to appropriate money, and nor would I be able to pay. Right? That's the number one thing that you're going to do at this point, is understand the ability, and you're all residents in Park Road, and you all pay taxes, right? And on your tax statement, there is something that says Park Road School District on your tax statement. $4 and 4.8096, whatever that number is, that's our permanent rate. And then we have a rate for our debt instrument, whatever we have to pay off that year. So those are the legal instruments that we have. If we fail to follow those rules and we don't get it to the taxing agency by the 15th of July, I won't be able to appropriate taxes, and then I'm gonna be in violation, and I may not be able to get property taxes imposed for the rest of the year. Now, have I ever done that? No. We did a couple years ago, forgot one digit on a number, and we caught it and corrected it, and had to bring it back to the board, because if you make changes to something that the board has already adopted, you have to come back and then tell the board, hey, I made a boo-boo, and I just need you to approve. I made a boo-boo on the supplemental budget. I put it on one line and it needed to be on this line. She did it correctly. I didn't put it on the resolution correctly. I had to bring it back to the board. Those things happen. It's hard when you have thousands of lines to do entry. And there's a lot of risk if our civil liability if I fail to do that. We're both bonded through our insurance agency. Board is actually bonded through our insurance company, right? But the liability we take, we understand it. If I take on a PERS debt, do I understand when I sign that paper? I am obligating this district to the next until 12/31 of 41 and 6/30 of 37. I have to pay those debts. That's what my role is in the district, and knowing what the liability we are. And every time we take a budget out, we have to understand what those liabilities are. Any questions on that? Okay, what this is right now, and this, we have one more year after this, and then the state chart of accounts is going to change the entire, how this looks. They're going to make it 40 some digits, something like that. Too many. That's in our mind. But the top circle is fund. We have 21 funds, right? And in that fund structure, and you'll see it later, we start, if it's a 1, that's our operating general fund. If it starts with 2, it means it's special revenue and it's dedicated or committed because of a specific reason, whether it's a grant, a union agreement, or something. Then we have debt funds, because I do have debt in this district, and those basically start with a 3, and the 5, 4 start with capital. You know, when you look at the first number on a fund, what they are, if you remember 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1s are operating, 2 are special revenue, 3 are basically debt, 4 are capital. Some districts where Jeannie was, when she did a budget, she would have a lot of funds, but everything rolled up into one fund. I don't do that here at this district. I've thought about doing it. I don't know if I'd be good at it, but we'll think about it another day. So the function, if you think of a function, let's say, what are you doing in the school, right? A function is, what is your job? Are you in education? Are you support? Are you ancillary services or community enterprise, which means like nutrition? A function means I'm instruction, I'm support, I'm community enterprise, I'm capital. Those are the functions that we think about. And it's hard to think about that in your house, but when I was showing my wife this, I said, now remember, you have 4 or 5 checking accounts. Think of your checking account as a function. You set this amount out for this role, this amount out for this role, and this. Just, oh, I can remember that, because she had different objectives when she was doing it, right? When you look at an object, that is what's your job. That's salaries, that's benefits, that's buying professional services, those kind of things. When you think of an object, it's basically, what am I doing as a job? Not where I'm working for the job, but what job am I doing? Or what am I buying? That's what you think about the object. Okay, center or DAC is basically your department number. Right? If you're Michael and the board, they have a department number 130. I have department number 150. All the schools start with a 9. But when you look at the financial statements, it's going to give you 2 ways to look at it. You're gonna be by function. And I have to also do it by object. So I have to know whether it's instruction or support. And then I have to show salary, benefits, and all those other things. Okay, and then I have to show a revenue tab. So every fund will have revenue and expense by function and expense by object. So I'll have all those on all the 21 funds. Area, basically it looks at something and says, oh, do I want to know how much I spent in English? Or how much I spent in PE? Or how much I spent in pre-K? Or how much I spent on homeless? We create a 3-digit number and that's our area. So if I wanted to focus on, like, we created numbers at the state and said I would specifically want to know how much I spent on special education. And it's called maintenance of effort, MOE. Now, we'll talk about that a lot, because that's been some of our causal factors of why our costs are out of the roof. But if I said in the budget, go look for a number that's 320, you won't typically, because we only have to report by function and object. So it's harder to get to that area code because I don't specifically show it there. Okay? And then last thing is the sub area. That's where we put the very last thing if I want a grant or if I want to specifically identify something that's not in an area. Right? All our grants have their own number. Right? We have federal grants. All federal grants have probably 8 numbers. We're going to have 8 or 9. My last agency, I had over 50 federal grants when I was at PPS. So, and this will make more sense once you get the budget, but this tells you how we have to look at the budget. Any questions? No. All right.
I have a quick one.
Sure.
Not technically, but, so the way I kind of think of it is a series of 2x2 matrix. So the funds and function 2x2. And you can see things falling into the different intersection. You're doing a function object 2x2. Am I thinking about it?
Correctly?
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
And in a CAP code, I have to have a fund, a function, an object, a DAC, an area, and a sub area on every activity we do. And now the state, starting 7/1 of 28, they're going to basically double that number sequence because they want to, because of Senate bill, or is that House bill? 141. Senate bill 141, because they want to know transparency and they're picking the accounting department as a method of understanding transparency, which they want to tie every source of revenue to every dollar you spend.
More granular.
Well, it's going to be very difficult to do because if I get $23 million in property taxes, do you get assigned on that piece of the property tax? Or do you actually get assigned because now I get the 17 million from the state school fund? Which one of you want to be at which side? And it's not as easy as saying that, but most of the people that are doing this at the state have never worked in a school district. But we're having a hard time getting them to listen. So, all right.
Quick question, Sheree. Sorry. The sub area funds, are those considered the restricted funds or designated funds?
The sub area is part of the account code. What would be restricted is the fund. And then
Got it.
Shortly, you'll see a page with 21 funds on it. And I put beside it whether it says unassigned, committed, restricted, and you'll be able to see that. All right. It'll make more sense. Okay. So at this point, like I said, we have resources or requirements. And your requirements are expense, your resources are revenue. In the budgetary financial statements, they have to be coded that way because of the state law. In my world, when you get monthly financial statements, I do not code them this way. Because that's not how people normally read financial statements. But by budget law, I have to put resources and requirements. Okay? And appropriations is basically a one-page document for debt, and then I have another page document for actually my general purpose fund. And once we get to past the phases of the budget, the proposed budget to move it to approved, that's when it goes to the board, and at the end of June, they'll do their appropriations. But I try to do it so you guys can understand it. When we move from proposed to approved, I bring those resolutions in here so people understand what that really is and what that means. I don't send them to the taxing commission because I have to have a different structure, and I wouldn't have published a public notice, and I would have been in violation, but. Because one of the budget laws is that I have to do a public notice between 5 and 30 days, and I have to do it on the district website and on a newspaper. And that cost us 2,100 or 2,200 for that small public notice that we did just a couple weeks ago. Very expensive. But it's law, and I don't know, the only other way that I could get around that is if I actually individually sent a letter to every parent and I knew where they were and gave them that notice. That's not gonna happen. And it would probably cost me more because of the amount of residents. Alright. Why are we here? Just like the front page. We're here for the schools. We're here for the kids. We're here for the parents. Plain simple. That's my job. I took this job because I spent 12 years, literally 12 years of my educational life as a special education student in a room by myself because I had very horrible discipline problems. I had severe ADHD. I couldn't control it. And when I was there, they didn't know what to do. I threw chairs at people. I was the fourth child, and my mother said, I'm not dealing with it. I'm passionate about education for a reason. She's a prior teacher who then decided to become an accountant. So we love what we do, but it's a really challenging time right now. Okay? Here are the rules. If you choose to read them on your will, I do not force you to read. I am probably the only one in this department because Jeannie's not gonna read them. Nope. I read federal law and state law for fun because I think it's interesting. Everybody looks at me like I'm weird. I am weird, and I know that. But it allows me to teach and at a better way than most people teach federal law because they make it very confusing to understand. I think if you understand what the law means, it makes it very easier for you to understand and teach it. The holy grail of the budget law is appropriation. Okay? Appropriation basically means that board on June 22nd sign a resolution, and in that resolution, it gives me the authority to appropriate dollars for debt and general property tax, what we call the general rates. Those two things, and I have to appropriate it, and the only way I can appropriate it is through the board signing the resolution that they agree to what's in that budget instrument, and that it's complying to the laws that I'm basically telling you. Because I know you guys are not going to a budget class that is 5 weeks long to learn this. Right? So you basically trust that I'm going to lead you down the path to ensure that we're doing the thing right. I have to have legal permission to spend. If I fail to have that resolution, and it has happened to a local district around here recently, and they had to go to the taxing commission and get an exception so they could spend their tax dollars. If you don't do it, you don't get tax dollars. Plain and simple. And if you don't have tax dollars, and this district, since 70% of our revenue comes from property taxes, I'm up the ship and down the paddle and out the door, and I'm unemployed. That would basically say, you have to know when you have to, this is one of the absolutely the most important thing you have to do. If I don't appropriate it, I can't spend it. And I try to tell it when you also have grants. Grants come when you write them during the year, right? You get an $8 million grant. You send it and put it in a fund that only has $50,000. And that 50,000 is what you appropriated. Do you have the ability to spend that $8 million? No. You cannot spend that money until you appropriate it through the board and get approved. And then send it and say, I got authority and I did my public notice, I submitted it and do those things. That's the law. Because in the law, it means I have to do public notice 5 to 30 days. I have to submit this. People get the right to have a comment. And if they wanna have a comment, whether I'm doing it right or wrong, and then I get to spend it. Now, we've been doing this long enough. If a small one comes in and something happens and you spend it because it's gonna be one expense. I will allow it because I will appropriate it before the end of the year and I won't be out of compliance. But most districts, if you get a big one, you'd be in a big world of hurt if you started to spend something and you don't have to go over it. Yep,
I heard you mention two categories, and I thought I would hear three. We talked about the general fund, we talked about service and debt. And I was expecting CapEx as well.
you have
Yes.
special revenue funds,
Okay,
okay, and then you have capital funds.
okay,
You have basically 4 main structures. We don't have any proprietary funds, right? We used to treat proprietary funds or student body funds many years ago, but when the governmental accounting standards changed that law, right, we had an appropriation change in GASB, we no longer treated the student body fund as a proprietary fund, right? So we basically have operating funds, not operating and proprietary funds. Budget law is, and if you know a lot of business managers, they're not the most friendly people in the world. They like to stay in their office. Transparency is not their thing. I'm very much on transparency. Jeannie would stay in her office if she would, because that's not her thing, right? That's why we make a good team, right? She's more in the weeds and I'm out being transparent what it is and I can explain it. I'm still in the weeds, but it's usually at hours that nobody's here, right? Because I'm out in the field. But you have to be and know everything has to be transparent. As I said, I can put, my bloomers up and I tell you what they are. And that's how I treat my financial statements. Just like I treat my own. I will tell you what it is. I'm not gonna hide it. And that's what I'm known for, and this district is known very well for it. We don't usually struggle as much as other unions do, who struggle with somebody's trying to hide. They got money, they don't know what it is, and right, and I help a lot of business managers explain what those funds are, because a lot of business managers understand they have them, but they don't know how to explain them. Okay? And what they can use them for. So understanding what you can and cannot do with them. All right? One of the structures in this world is we have to be balanced. And Michael says that every time we meet outside with all the schools when we're cutting, we have to balance our budget. The debits and the credits have to come to zero. At the federal government, they don't have to have a balanced budget. They either make money or they just, I don't know. I do know what they do, but I don't want to go into that. But we do have to balance our budget, right? And if we're not balanced, then I would have to come back and then ensure and correct my resolution and bring it back to the board if it wasn't done. Okay. 4 phases of the budget. You're in the first phase, proposed phase. Proposed phase is basically, I do a proposed, and that starts in December, when you're not even at the state. I'm building estimates for the state of Oregon to think what I'm gonna have. And then, come April, I'm submitting what I think is my proposed budget, right? And then you guys, as a committee, as the board and the budget committee, work together and say, Sheree, you're in Fruit Loops, you have no idea what you're doing, your numbers don't tie, and you would not approve my budget. Or you take it and say, okay, this makes sense, our programs are solid, we're meeting our equity lens, and we're following the guide. Once you go from that approved, the next step is, proposed, you go to approved. And after you have 3 meetings, 4, we do the training, you have 3 professional meetings. First one will be on the 22nd, then I think you'll have one on the 6th, and the following 2 weeks after that. At the, either the 22nd, or the 6th, or the 3rd, our hope is that you got enough understanding that you will take from proposed to approved. That's that first and second step, right? And at that point, we take it out of the budget committee's hands and we say, thank you for your time. And all the work you've done at reading the budget, I know it's not fun to read, and then we hand it off back to me and Michael, and then we determine from your comments whether or not we can make any significant change. If you make a change more than 10%, I have to then take it back out to the public again, because the budget law is if you exceed 10% of any of the appropriation levels, you have to go back out to the public and say, now what are you doing? That's that transparency thing, right? And then from approved, I then go back to the budget. I don't have to bring it back to the budget committee. I have to take it back to the board. Because you guys have already approved it at its stage. If it changes after it leads to you more than 10%, then we have to do a different thing. Very seldom do I ever try to make anything of a 10%. I think the only time we did it is when we got PSEP money and we got it right at the end of the year, and it was like a $5 million grant and an $8 million grant. We didn't know if we were gonna get the cash up front. I had to appropriate the money, and obviously $13 million was more than I had in my special revenue account, so I had to do a supplemental budget and redo it.
That's just the budget and have.
Yes. But every fund has to match by appropriation, which is by function and object. So if you're out more than 10%, then I then have to, one of the things I give to you when you're gonna look at it is it will tell you out of those funds, how many have exceeded 10% or that, right? If I basically go down more than 10%, I don't have to go out for public notice. But if I go up by more than 10, I do. Okay, then when we get it to the board says, thank you, Sheree, and I presented on the 22nd of June. They have no questions, because on the 22nd, if you want to approve it, you can. But it usually goes to the second meeting, because you guys want to take it home and like think it's your Bible, and you're gonna read it from front to cover, and you have all your questions. And I know that's not right, but you may not. And then you're gonna come back that next meeting with a series of questions, because one of you are gonna be the board chair, and you're gonna flip those questions and give to Michael and I and Jeannie, and then we come back that next meeting and we answer all those questions. What I try to do on the first budget meeting is prevent all those questions by trying to answer all of them ahead of time. Okay? I'm not asking for it to be approved. I'm not. What I'm asking is to give you more clarity up front, so you don't have that next phase. So we go from approved, next stage is adopted. That's your third phase. You adopt it. And then I legally, within 15 days, or by the 15th of July, have to send it to the state, upload it to the state, send it to the Fed, and then have to send it to the taxing commission and every debt instrument that I have. So they have copies of anything that we do, right? If we get it to the taxing commission and everything's balanced, yay, that's cheerleading day. The last phase of a budget is if you do a supplemental. And you can do a supplemental one day after you adopted it, if you want to. Right? I choose not to do that many supplemental. Jeannie will tell you, she hardly ever did a supplemental. I do a supplemental every year because I want my ending fund balance, or as you say, your checking account, your revenue minus your expenses, or your, whatever you have on your last line, your surplus, whatever, is realistic in your checkbook. I try to make that, my checkbook at the district, look like it actually is. Most people in my position say, I don't really care if that rolls, because it's gonna roll next year. I try to have it during the year, so when people look at the financial statements, it's actually real. You don't have to do it, I choose to do it. Okay? So those are the 4 things. Any questions? Okay. The budget is started by me, November, December. We start school in September. Our first enrollment is due in December. and this is where I'm going, what is the enrollment? How is the number of kids? Because we get money based on butts in the seat, right? So I'm constantly asking, how is the enrollment, right? Because that's one of the things I have to collect. So I'm preparing and meeting with Michael, the cabinet. I may have to go out to the schools if there's a change in program, but I want to know how many special education kids I have, how many ELL kids, the kids that have second language. I want to know how many teen pregnant to kill. I want to know how much I think I'm going to spend on transportation. I want to know how much money I spent on this last year, how much I think it's going to go up this year. So all of those things, there's like 9 to 10 things I have to put together. They don't all come from one place, right? So usually when everybody goes on Christmas break, I sit here and do it because it's quiet. Right? And I know where to get things. And I try to ask them before they go on Christmas break. So by the time they come back from Christmas break in early January, by that first week, Friday, the state is saying that's your deadline of submitting what you think are going to need for the next fiscal year. So I knew in January how short we were. And what we were waiting for is, anybody know what House Bill 1 is with Mr. Trump? What were the fiscal impacts of that? What was the state going to do because we're so connected to the feds? All of those played into how we were going to make changes in our budget. And I can't rush out and say, I got anywhere from $250,000 cut to $2 million, and then say that we're gonna cut that immediately. Because there was no guarantee I was gonna have that cut. So you just have to know that we're about, do you make those decisions now and you communicate them, or you communicate and then say, we're steadfast until the state makes a decision. And we knew House Bill 1 would be something that legislators would be discussing. Right? And thankfully, because of some changes, House Bill 1 did not cause us to have a cut of roughly $250 to $2 million. So we were thankful, which helped us on what I thought would be the money that we're gonna do in the future. Okay? And the next day, I modify it, whatever I thought the budget was, because let's say I had a bunch of vacancies in my numbers because they didn't get adjusted. That's what happened last year. When I did the budget, we gave the numbers to the people. I thought I did a good job, but I didn't go back and finish it. So those vacancies were still sitting on my book, even though I cut them. So I had to make sure I went back and said, can you make sure these are not here? Because my staff and my numbers aren't matching this number. And then I printed out and said, oh yeah, they're not here anymore. They're not here anymore. I said, yes, they are. They're on the books. And they're still showing as a number. And then the HR would go in and take them out or inactivate them in essence. So my numbers were more realistic. So I started at this number and it got me lower.
So vacancies you talked about here.
Yeah, that's FTE, full-time employee, or part-time employees, if I have somebody that doesn't work a full 8 hours or 7 hours a day. And like I said, we modified and adopt the budget based on what we as a budget committee and board decide in the next 3 meetings if we want to. But what comes out of this meeting, the district can make changes and take some of the recommendations, but they're not required. You're here to guide us and how we make decisions. You can't tell us you have to make that decision. So that's the one thing you take from this is the board and the budget committee are an instrument to give us guidance and say, you got Fruit Loops free. Where are you going with that? Or you're in a great path. And we would prefer that you go there and then we can take it back to the cabinet and say, yeah, they're right on track. Sure, what were you doing? And then we would make changes. But they can't force you. That's the key. I need to understand you. Does everybody understand their role? All right. Anybody? Brendan? Brittany? You good with that?
I'm good.
No. All right. All right. Who creates the budget? Like I said, the majority of it done. It's about an 8-month process. Right? Just to put the proposed budget together and starting. Right? Most of it starts with Jeannie and me and sitting in cabinet and listening to where the enrollment is going, where the kids are moving, listening to special education saying, hey, I got 7 new kids coming in. I'm like, no, you don't, right? I can't accept 7 kids. Could you deny them? And he looks at me and says, you know, I can't deny them. I understand, but I don't have the money. So then I have to make those adjustments. Those are the things I deal with in the cabinet if we have to make adjustments, right? But other thing is then looking at the budget, and this is where I'm at Lewis and Clark. And when I teach the aspiring administrators is, how do you make equity lens decisions on a large budget, right? Who gets priority, right? We're a district that has a very high poverty. We have a high students of color. We have lots of students that are immigrants. What's the priority? The leadership and the board have to make those priorities. They have to set those goals out. And then I have to listen to them as we make decisions. And a board member who used to be here, if I signed a contract, she said, did you go back and get 3 vendors? Did you ask that minority person? You know, they were always conscious of asking those things. So it's important in our mind to make those decisions. And why did you select that person? Right? Whether you're a private vendor or when you're going to interview some, why did you pick that person? Right? If you have all white employees, it's going to be very difficult. So is it always going to be the way you want to? But you have to be acceptable for understanding that not everybody looks like you and not everybody reacts like you. But you have to learn how to make those financial decisions with an equity lens. Finances have equity lens. It's not just education. Everything we do in finance may not look like it has an equity lens, but we do make decisions on how we hire based on who comes in and where we think is going to fit well within our kids and our staff. Who's going to fit well within that operation? I don't think that's going to, we make those decisions. And you have to be honest within yourself and say, you know, this is my concern. But you also have to do the due diligence and research and go out and look for more than one vendor, the same vendor every time. Because I did have one person that was here, he would choose the same vendor every time, and I said, you can't do that. You have to go out and get 3 bids, and they cannot be the same vendor every time. And he was not very happy, but that's, ask away.
On corporate, what we would do is we probably have 9 months of actual and 3 months of forecast. It leaves the budget. We've actually used forecasted numbers for the last 3. Is that something that you guys do when you're doing the initial forecast of the company?
I do financial statements every month for the board. And I have year-to-date column, and then I have a projected column.
Okay.
And I have assumptions based on where I think enrollment is going up or down. Where my property taxes all of a sudden tanked in 1 month, what happened, right? Or then I looked at it and said, and compare it to the last 18 years, because I have a property tax statement for the last 18 years to see where it was. Or to say, they're making changes in the high cost disability, this new rule that they were gonna do, the state would keep the money until the end, at the end of the 2nd year, they would give me the money. And I'm like, oh, no, that won't work for me. Right, so knowing when those trends and when that money comes in, she knows when checks come in, because she'll know that Thursday, because we take checks every Thursday, hey, this is a Thursday, I'm gonna have a lot of money. Next Thursday, because I usually get the construction excise tax money, or I get Senate Bill 1149 money, those are very nice checks, or I'm getting the rental money. Because we have 3 rentals that we have, so we don't leave those sitting in the vault. Knowing where those trends are is helpful. Or basically in your world, that's called cash flow statement.
Yes.
In my world, we don't do a lot of cash flow statements, right? Because in my governmental Wi-Fi statements, under GASB, you don't do the cash flow statement. If you're a municipality, you do. You're a school district, under governmental guidelines, I don't have to do a cash flow. Okay, fun. It's like I told you earlier, my spouse has 5 checking accounts. In our world, those checking accounts are fun. I have one. You got one for her hair when she has her hair and nail appointment. There's another one for car boo-boo. And she got another one, she wants to go out and have fun. I mean, and she takes things and she puts them in little envelopes after she gets paid, and she puts them in the little places. She's like this 80-year-old woman who never wants to vote. She goes to the bank when she gets paid, and she gets them in envelopes, it's here, here, and here. And then she puts 35% in each one of the checking accounts. That's what I told her to do, but then she keeps the rest of it and she takes money out every other week to do cash. And then she writes down, that's how much is left. I said, you have a debit card, I can use it now. But in our world, we have funds. Okay, believe it or not. Okay? We have 21. And there's a reason why we have 21. We have fund balance. In your world, you think of it as surplus. Okay, in our world, it's called a fund balance. And then when you get the financial statements at the end of the year, which the board does, on the entity-wide statement, it's called a net position. On the budgetary statements, it's called a fund balance. Okay? On corporations, it's the same thing, they just have different verbiage on an entity-wide. And the entity-wide financial statements basically takes out the duplicity of transactions. If I transfer it from one place to another, why would I put it in both places? So an entity-wide, they take that out. Thinking of that, an entity-wide financial statement versus a governmental financial statement. Okay? We have to determine revenue projections. Our biggest revenue in this district, unlike most districts, is property tax. We're property tax heavy. We're about 70% property tax. Or if you go to David Douglas, BPS, all those around us, they are state school fund heavy and property tax poor. Okay? The difference between that, I have the airport, Cascade Center. Those are all in our property tax level. Our real market value, assessed value for this district just by ourselves is over $5 billion. I have 27,000 residents. I would love to see the inside of those houses for those 27,000 at $5 billion. Right? You all know what your assessed value is. You get your property tax statement, and I can guarantee you, you're not in that billion level. Because I haven't seen that house, and I walked a lot around here. I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
But
come
that-
further.
Yeah.
Yeah, go Paul's house.
So that's the distinguishing.
That's the outlier. That's the outlier.
You're not walking far enough.
So here's my answer to that. The next time you come, could you please bring your checkbook and make a great donation?
I just bring cash. I got 5 on it, that's it.
So when you think about that, to understand where those revenue projections are and how you get those. Knowing the ebb and flow, because I always meet with the taxing commission. Because we're not a big district, I don't have to pay the taxing commission to meet with them, and they would have to do and actually govern you. And next step, like Portland Public, they're large enough, they have to go through the TSCC and present their budget to the TSCC also. We don't have to do that, which is small. However, I have a relationship with them because I was at PPS for 10 years. I use them as a resource to project some of my property taxes to make sure I'm making sound decisions, right? So understanding where that money is, and it's always tricky when you go into the second year of the biennium, which is what we're gonna be doing after this budget, is where the state's gonna go with the state school fund, right? Are they gonna give us more money? Right, because right now, we are hindered, and it's called a phrase equalization. We all know what Measure 5 and Measure 50, and you're gonna get a presentation, a film. But because we are that district that was in the top 5 in the state in the early 90s, when Impact Aid was in existence, Impact Aid does not exist anymore. Impact Aid was, you basically had the property taxes, you collected them, you kept them. Right? And whatever you reported to the state, we went, psh, there was no reconciliation called equalization, and you didn't have to give anything back, right? Well, now because of Measure 50 and Measure 5, they and compression rules, if we make more revenue, which we did this like every year I've been here, if I make more revenue and my enrollment goes like this, that property tax went, thank you, Sheree, you just go ahead and take it. I do not get to keep it. It goes to the state and goes to the rest of the 196 district. And they get to share what we brought in as property tax. That's called equalization. I know you had questions.
It's almost as though a ceiling has been created for the district in terms of what they can pull in from property tax.
Because when they did this years ago, they didn't look at the district of where you were. You were very populous. You were a very rich district like Lake Oswego. You had money, right? But when you changed it and said you could only do a 3% growth, okay, that 3% growth is going, your kid grew 5 inches this year. Screw that 3%, right? They did 15% this year. There's none of that. Okay, so we're stuck in that. Can't go unless you, and a lot of these places that are homes around you, they don't sell to a new resident where it would start over at a new real market value. They sell it to their kids or give it to their kids, so you still have that same 3% growth. Does that make sense?
That's your plan.
You guys, Brittany? Either one,
Yeah.
Brittany, you have any questions on that?
I
That
understand
makes
it.
sense to me.
Okay,
It
All right.
absolutely sucks.
gotta love taxes. Oh, it is tax day too. Ah. All right. What goes into creating the budget? We talked about that. Ending fund balance. And you'll see this, the board sees it in the financial statements. It's not in the budget. We do not categorize it in the budget that way. But we categorize by GASB 54. And I know governmental county standards, you're like, I'm snoring, Sheree, do not repeat GASB 54. But what GASB 54 did, and if you think about it, I have 21 funds. And when you just said, well, I saw you told you you have an operating fund and you got this fund, wait a minute, you're missing a few, right?
Yeah.
That missing a few, back about 10 or 12 years ago, governmental accountants, and we had a financial crash, right? Remember that? S&P, Moody's, everybody crashed, right? Agency that crashed was Anderson, TPA firm and all that kind of stuff, right? When they did that crash, one of the things they realized in that crash, that people were hiding things, right? And they were not disclosing things. So as an auditor, you can't do that anymore. So every fund has to be determined whether you're unassigned, assigned, committed, restricted, or non-spendable. Right? And if you have a you don't have a revenue source that is a consistent revenue source, like property tax or this or that, you're going to get combined into the operating general fund. Right? We have 3 of them: textbooks, technology, and the retirement fund. They don't have basically a funding source. So under GASB 54, we have expenses every year, right? And I said I have expenses. Sure, you don't have. Oh yes, so whatever balance I have at the end of the year, called fund balance, that fund balance and the expenses of that get rolled into the general fund, and it becomes part of the general fund ending fund balance. Because the revenue source is not consistent and guaranteed, so therefore you cannot hide it anymore. And it was done for that purpose. It is not how they explained it under governmental accounting thing, because I was on that committee, but that's how I explained it. Anybody want to understand that one? Nope, all right. What do? General fund. That's where most of our money, when I talk about the money on next week, 99% of my discussion will be on the general fund, because that's where people move. 99% of the people are in that fund, except for my grant fund, SIA, which is my student investment account, and high school success and nutrition, right? The rest of them are sitting in the general fund, right? Because I don't have a special revenue source that anybody is giving me. So that's where it's at. So it may say it's unassigned, which means it's free reign to have, right? It basically, I have no obligations, no restrictions, no contracts, no nothing that says I can't play with it as a board. Well, I'm gonna tell you, that's not the answer. Because, do I have to pay salary? Yes. Do I have to pay to put toilet paper in the classroom? Yes. Do I have to buy supply? Yes. We do restrict our teachers in the schools down to 1.2% in materials and supplies. Where other agencies, they get a lot more. But there are things, fixed costs that I have to pay, regardless of the fact of saying, under government guidelines, I get to play with this fund. Yes and no. You get to play with what's left. In our district, what's left is less than $1 million. Plain and simple. You have $41 million in basically next year's fund. 1.1 million of that is beginning fund balance. That's the only thing that's not tied, other than $6,407 that's associated with temporary revenue. And basically $5,772 that was associated with federal transportation of basically foster children. Those are not restricted once I receive them. I can spend them, and then whatever's left in the fund balance. But when you're looking at 42 million, 1 million, and you guys wanna make change, that's where it's very difficult for a superintendent and an aspiring superintendent going, well, I now have all this money, can I do what I want with it? No, let me educate you why. You still have to pay people. Right? I still have to operate. I still have to turn the lights on. I have to pay the water bill. I have to pay the sewage bill, and I need people to pick up the trash. There's things. Or today, I get a $10,000 bill because the boiler stopped running and I have to pay that. Those are things I have to prepare for. So when I say it's unrestricted, unassigned, yes and no. Okay? Special revenue funds are those that I said that was created many years ago, so people, it would be in a dedicated fund. And I will tell you, one of the things that's a dedicated fund we're gonna do here in a week or so, the tax anticipation note. We're gonna take down a short-term debt of $3,705,000. That's gonna go into a tax anticipation note. It's a short-term debt. It's my fund 201. It's restricted. Why is it restricted? Because it has a legal document that says when I have to pay the debt. Plain and simple. Right? So we have capital funds. We actually have four capital funds. One capital fund, when we bought the 20-some vehicles when I first got here, because the buses were so old. We have basically a fleet fund. We have a smidgen left, and I keep it for when, let's say, when the speaker went out of middle school and I had to spend whatever amount I had to spend, $100,000. I could spend that amount because it's very little.
System, not the speaker.
So what is the half-life system?
Yeah, little fancy.
Right, and then we have a construction exercise bill 1 and Senate Bill 1149, and then we have a small transportation. So there's reasons for that, and I have two debt funds. One that's for our two pension bonds. I have a pension bond that's buying down what we call unfunded accrued liability. And if you guys have been listening to the pension and everybody in the country, it's an arbitrage for everybody. But we as a district made several years ago in 2018 and 22, we bought down all our debt. So our rates that were going through the state would be a lot less, right? So starting next year, or not next year, the year after, a lot of these districts that bought debts many years ago, they're done paying that first series debt, right? Their rates are going up to 29%. They were at like 2 and 3%. So if you think of your payroll being like ours, 20 million, now take that from a 2%, and this is where you're looking at PPS, they're looking at a huge, I think Gladstone's probably the worst in the state, that you're almost a 29% rate increase in first. In 1 year.
Is that because they're liability, their funds, liability is still involved? Or
the way the pension does here, you just buy the debt down. And by buying the debt down, you create what we call a side account. That side account is like a little buffer that says that 29-32% is up here, but that side account going, aha, I'm gonna let that one, I'm gonna reduce you. That's what the buying the UAL does. It decreases our debt. Doesn't say that I don't have, it doesn't just decrease our debt, it increases our rate. Now, we save $500,000 to $750,000 a year by doing that. In probably the year or so after I leave, you will make a whole lot more because I structured the debt for those two first debts to make more the last 12 years of the debt. The first couple of years was more harder on the district, but I didn't, because most people do an amortization when they buy something, the amortization goes up, right? I built the amortization to go down for these. So in the future, the district will be a lot better off because those are actually helping the district. Because our debt will be roughly the same, but I'm not going this high.
So it calls for
Thank you,
service.
Sheree.
Which is good, but right now, when the market's not doing real well, it's not making me really happy, but it will come back up, alright? So those are the major funds. Okay, we have 4 capital, we have 2 debt, we have 1 general fund, and there's the rest of your 21 funds. I told you I'd give you a list. There's the 21 funds on the next one, and they are assigned restricted, committed. Very well asked one, general fund, and I just told you 99% of the general fund is committed or restricted. So you don't get a lot of play with it, but at least when you see that number, you now can correlate it with a name. Okay? And Andrea, I hope will send you this presentation tomorrow, so you'll have it.
Thank you,
Brittany?
Andrea.
Alright, or I will, one or the other. Alright, revenue sources. Like I said, the biggest source for us, property tax. We do have what we call a general checking account. That's where we pay our bills every day. And Jeannie and Elizabeth do a fantastic job. They don't move money out of our investment accounts into that main checking unless they need to pay bills. Because I want it in that local government investment pool, right? That's run by the state, because I get more interest, right? So we make roughly 380 to 400,000 in interest a year, right? For the LGIPs that we have, local government investment pool. So they pull them down when they need them. Because I want to make sure that I have them there. One of the things I had to do when we went for the tax anticipation note, I had to pull down all the available cash. So I showed them, I don't have a lot of little cash. Could you please give me a short-term loan so I can make it until my next property tax pledge, right? We have tuition revenue. I think, I haven't received any in the last 6 years. But if a child chooses to come here and they want to transfer in, right? If they don't want to release them or whatever, we can charge a student tuition. And it's based on the net operating expense of the district. And I've never, in my 20 some odd years, ever charged a parent tuition. We're a free and public education, so they figure their way around it. But there's a lot of places around the country that get charged tuition just like a private school. Right? But, okay, we have state school fund. We make about anywhere between 13 to 17 million. Remember when I said we had 2 PERS debts? If I pay down the debt, that means I have to pay principal and interest. Well, the state has something, when they give me their state school fund money, they have something called intercept. They intercept my cash and take that money before I get it. It's kind of like when you have a dedicated receivable and you know that you're due that money as a corporation, but somebody else says, so bad, sucker, I'm gonna get that cash before you. That's what basically the state is doing with the intercept fund. They're taking it and ensuring they get paid before I get our state school fund. All right? We get grant revenue, some years it's great, some years it's not. Next year, if the administration, we may not get any federal revenue at all, but right now we have our allocation for this next year.
So this grant fund is only federal funds, or does it include?
We have state money,
State-
you have state money and county, so we have. One of our pre-Ks is through the state, but the other three are through the county. The county ones actually pay more than the state one, right? I do get other state grants that are associated like the early literacy. It's not a federal grant, it's a state grant. So we have a fund that we have, Fund 280, anything that's local or state, that grant stays in that fund. Because in the yearly audit, I have to do what they call a CEPA, and I have to report my federal funds. I didn't want to commingle state, local, and federal all in the same fund, so I have one fund just for federal. So when I have to run the report at the end of the year, it's very easy for me to identify whether or not I have reported all my federal funds.
So the student investment account and the high school success, are those state grants?
Those are state grants, because there's legislation that was passed in the state to tax entities. So whether it be corporations or people, they were taxed, and then that goes to the state, and then we get an application.
I apologize for slowing us down.
Oh, you're fine. But the state made a decision a couple of years ago, they would create two separate funds. I was gonna put them in a grant, they chose to put them in their own separate funds. So 251 is student investment, and 252 is high school success. Okay? Ending fund balance is just like your checkbook, at the end of the day, revenue minus expenses, ending fund balance. Okay? And then we have transfer revenue. We try not to transfer money in the general fund unless I absolutely need it, and then we try to hold off until the end of the year. And if I have enough revenue to make it through the end of the year, I try not to transfer. I budget a lot, but if I don't need them, I leave them there, right? However, the last 2 years, the general fund has been the only source that has been able to pay for technology, curriculum, and the retirement fund. So the general fund has been paying and transferring every year the last 2 years, and it's been 500,000. 200 to textbook, 200 to curriculum, to technology, and 100,000 for retirement. So transfers, and in our world, transfers out, transferred in, at the end of the day, they have to balance. And at the end of the day, when I do NADY, they go, it gets flowed out, because I don't have to report it that way, because on the NADY, I take out the duplicate entry. Okay,
Just one more one.
go right ahead.
The Indian fund balance,
Uh-huh.
I'm assuming that that's an aggregate number at the end of the fiscal year.
It takes
Because
you,
those funds could be coming from restricted lines, do they roll over into the next year's budget? In that same restricted category, or they can be reallocated from?
they do not, if they're in their own fund, they therefore keep the restriction or committed of that specific fund. If you're in the general fund, I have state revenue or local, which is your property tax. Then I have state revenue, that's your state school fund. Then I have a little bit of federal, like $5,772, right? And then I have intermediate revenue, which is the art tax, right? I do not have to keep them in that same structure at the end of the year if they give me a positive balance. It goes into what we call the beginning fund balance of that next year. Okay. Pop quiz. I love quizzes. No, I don't. But basically, you can answer that on your own time. The answer is.
G.
Oh, I can add a G, yeah. All the above. Okay. Let's hope this works well. This has been the most beneficial one, and where is this taking me? I pulled.
Now should show the video.
Yeah,
You have to click on the link that has the YouTube that's highlighted in pink.
The purse is not.
No.
The little mouse in the purse is stuff. There you go.
That was me, but I won't let me do it either. Where's it at, Jenny?
Supposedly sharing.
I'm just clicking the link on the slide.
Yeah, and it took me to this browse YouTube.
Yeah, you
Oh, it's because it's sharing the screen of your presentation and not of the YouTube.
You
Yeah.
might need to open it in a new window and share that with.
Go to the YouTube.
What's that?
Maybe put an online test.
It's not doing what I want. What do you want to help?
Yeah.
You're currently sharing a
do this
single
the last
window
time.
of your computer.
Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, no.
There's the stop share up there.
Oh,
I'm just trying to understand.
No, yeah.
Okay, so I come from the corporate side, not.
Do I have to go back up here?
Our language is. She knows the language.
You just need to reestablish what she's sharing, Mike.
And there's my house.
I'm sorry, I'm not there. I'm sitting at my son's soccer practice.
Okay.
Didn't have this problem last night.
It should give you an option to share the whole screen or one window, and you'll want to share whole screen.
Concepts of the same.
Here we go.
So putting on test.
But now I
Oh,
go back.
I'll learn her. Dude, she actually,
He was funny for it.
she actually do me too.
Yeah. I kindly volunteer.
Sheree, I can do it from here if you want to give me the slide.
It's been 2 years for me.
I don't know why it's not.
Yeah. I don't either. I'm sure that-
Is it the same video as last year? I can share that one.
Yeah.
Okay, can you see it?
Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you, Andrea.
I did it earlier, it worked.
Ready? Here we go.
It's complicated. It's unpopular. It's Oregon's property tax, and it's evolved over the years, for better or worse. Until 1990, property taxes were fairly straightforward. You paid property taxes as a percent of the market value of your home. That was it. Done. Eventually, Oregonians complained high taxes. So in 1990, Oregon voters passed Measure 5, which for the first time capped property taxes at 5% of value. The cap didn't help when property values started to climb. Again, Oregonians complained of high taxes. So in 1996, voters Measure 47. Legislators said the measure lacks control. So a year later, voters updated Measure 50. That passed into where we stand today. Measure 50 completely changed the way property taxes are calculated. Instead of paying taxes on your property's market value, Measure 50 says you pay taxes on the 1995 value.
Like,
Minus 10%.
there,
But it's
I think it's just conflicting.
for newly constructed homes, instead of using a 1995 value, which doesn't exist, the maximum assessed value is set based on other houses in the same county. with the intent to get most homeowners similar savings. But, like every other home, 3% is added every year to the amount. Which is a better deal on the system, especially for people who got a first transfer, but the next one is time.
But it sounds better.
Arbitrary base year.
They could turn
Just
that
happened to be the tax year before Measure 47, eventually Measure 50 passed. So homes in areas like inner Northeast Portland, say, that had fairly low property values in 1995, lower property taxes. As more popular over time, house values have climbed. So current residents are paying pretty low taxes on pretty pricey homes. On the flip side, prices on homes in areas like East Portland, West County, and the West Hills haven't risen dramatically in years. Less tax savings, there's fewer in neighborhoods. What does this all suggest? Well, almost 2 decades later, more tax system is necessary. At least not the way fairness is defined in most states, where people pay taxes based on what their homes are worth. How do we know this? Well, if we took the total amount area homeowners saved on property taxes under Measure 50 last year and redistributed according to property values, about 57% of tax bills go down, meaning only 43% do better with the current system. Those other taxpayers are which home values for which is a majority of homeowners.
He's gonna, Andrea will stop sharing.
I'll just see if it'll play now. Can you hear it?
Yeah, it's not gonna share in the same way, you have to go.
Why don't you just send the link?
I was gonna say, why don't we just share the link?
That's what I can see on the share.
So we need to, Andrea, can you stop sharing? Or let's actually go see where.
I thought I did stop sharing. So you guys couldn't hear that?
You do the video.
Well, you call it. Now you gotta go back and share it. Let's see if we can do it then.
It's gonna do the same thing. I would just go directly to go to your next slide. We'll just share.
Alright. So much for this, it has worked every year I've done this.
I think last year it worked and then the speakers didn't work.
Alright. But if you take the link and go home with it, it'll work. Alright. So I went through Measure 50 and Measure 5 2 different ways, whether you like to read it or you want to look at the map. But it basically says 2 things at that point. They're gonna look at did you originally own the home? And at that point, you have a break-even point. It says what year it starts, right? Or are you a new homeowner and then you can start growing? But I did it verbally one way and then I did mathematically another way. But the video does a better depiction of actually how to calculate it.
It really all, it caps assessed value.
At 3%. Throughout the year.
Oh, the school piece.
No,
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Okay, I understand.
no. It's for that is for your house. And one of the impetuses for doing that was, they're saying, when the market was going up in the late eighties, I was not here, I was a cop in Memphis, so I don't know. But in theory, the housing market was climbing too high and the property taxes were outliving those that were here. So therefore, these two instruments were created to kind of stabilize the taxing, right? However, those districts like us have really had the full breadth of that hit us. In the first couple 10, 15 years, we still had some fund balance and was wavering with it. But in the last 10 years, it has hit us hard. Because we get the revenue, but because we get the revenue and we've got that high assessed value because of those properties, we hit that compression. And we have over $1 million every year, or $1.5 million in compression. Where if you look at Reynolds and David Douglas comparably, they don't nearly have as much compression as we do. So it's a funky rule. I think whoever was the fiscal agent who did this didn't think long range what this is. Similar like the state school fund, it's been in existence for 30, 40 years and nobody wants to change it or, push the envelope. That's the best way I was told. And I'm willing to push the envelope, so. Okay.
For the district still,
We can't lobby for the change of the tax law, measure 50, measure 5. We could, but you would have to lobby at the state level, not at the district level. Because it is a state legislation, not a district legislation. Okay, and this is probably the best example if you're going to look at one and want to look at it together. You could take that video and then look at these two examples and it exactly will make sense to you. Okay. What else goes in creating our proposed debt? Bonds, salaries, steps. We're in the middle of bargaining. Okay. I can tell you when one of the unions came, it was more than what I planned for, right? So how do you plan for that? In this district, we don't have a very large reserve. Typically in standards, you want to keep 2 to 3 months of payroll in your ending fund balance at any one given time, right? I came into this district with $352,000 in the bank. And the first day I was here, I paid $1 million debt to the union because we had lost an agreement that we had, right? I've been building it up for years. However, we in this district don't have a fund structure that requires us to keep a 5 or 10% ending fund balance, right? And this last year, we have used it, what we had, a lot. Because we've had a lot of things that have happened that we had no control over. Hence is the reason why we're doing a tax anticipation. So that makes me and Jeannie's job extremely difficult when we're trying to prepare the budget and saying, I put 3% into the budget, but the other agency wants this number, and then one that we haven't even got the request, we don't know what that means. We have other people that have gotten requests for 3 years, well over 20%. We couldn't sustain that, but we have told everybody, you asked for the moon, the door is gonna hit people in the Katushish, because we can't afford it. So people are gonna have to go out the door, because we do not have leverage in a fund balance to sustain that. And we have no control over what they're gonna ask. We just have to say, what is gonna be the thing? So that every 2 to 3 years, this is what we have to do in lobbying and talking to the unions. Michael and Mary do a great job. They meet with them every month, and they kind of get a breath of what they think that's going to happen. A lot of districts, that does not happen. They go into bargaining, and it starts out with this, right? We had a class on the 18th. It was 2.5 hours. They got more in the weeds than they possibly could ever get in. But they at least knew where transparency was, and they know where we are. as my phrase, I don't have a pocket percent, don't ask for it. Cause I don't have it. And it's real, because we are back to where I was 11 years ago. Because that 10-year trend where we thought we had money and we could do things, we got federal money, our money, ESSER money, those things have all somehow outlived us. We are on our own. And the cost of doing business is a lot higher. And the complexity of the students are a lot higher, but the numbers of students are flat or just a slight increase. If that wouldn't work in your house, it definitely doesn't work in our house, right? So explaining that kind of complexity, and there's a slide that you guys will see that basically says the average cost of the student in 22-23 was $15,000 to $20,000 for a gen ed kit. Okay, the state at that time gave us $9,800 per kit. Now, if that was your household, I gave you $9,800, and it cost you $20,000, and I said, under no circumstance could you change anything in the educational model, and I'm going to give you more stuff to do, and don't bicker. How would you like that? That's where we are in this district, because we have our hands tied because we have mandates. And one of the things we have to think about, what are the things, what are my sources of money, and what's causing those things? Okay? Anybody have any questions on that? And I know I explained it completely different than a normal person, but I think it, for me, I like to understand it like boots on the ground. Expenses, you have steps. These are contracts. These are CBAs by the union. And if you have not, right, they're not based on merits. We don't do it that way here. If you have ability to grow in whatever your step range is, you'll get that step next year unless you leave the district. Then you build in COLA. Then you build in the cost of increase in insurance, right? What are all those things, right? We've done in the last 8 years a huge increase since Michael's been here, because prior to Michael, Karen, and everybody basically said, I'm gonna have 10 days of furlough, nobody gets a COLA. Now, if you know in your own world, you don't get a COLA for 1 or 2 years, how long is it gonna take you to grow to be whacked with your peers? It takes you a long period of time, because you are never gonna catch up. So that's what Michael and Mary, we've been doing for years, and it's been a very expensive process. Right?
And to be fair too, when you see the budget next week, you know, we assume increases, right? Like, we know that we have to bargain a contract and bargain, we're not going to a table saying we're not gonna pay you. So some of the assumed costs are part of the gap that we face, and really that's just working with our labor groups to say, how much do we balance in terms of knowing that we do have to reduce staff in order to afford the increased costs. And like Sheree said, it has cost our district a lot more money to play catch up. Because from 2009 to 2014, teachers didn't get increases, administrators, nobody in the district really received increases. And they lost salary because we took days off. So that took, you know, more than 10 years to catch up to the salary table than what the county would say. Teacher in Park Roads is comparatively paid to their peers in Lincoln County, and that's where we need to kind of mark that.
Okay.
Sheree,
Who's on the-
will we have access to historical data? I'm sorry, Sheree.
You will have access to historical data. If you had been at the training that we had on the 18th, I went all the way back to, on some charts, 2011, 12, and other actual expenses in the general fund, I went back to 17, 18. I wanted to go prior to COVID on the general fund, so you can see the trend, right, and what we're changing. And some of the other funds, I went back, like the property tax, it goes back all the way to 11, 12. Does that
Thank
help?
you. Yes, very.
It's kind of manual, but it's Sheree's way, and I'm an old accountant. I still do T accounts, Jeannie does not, but I like T accounts. He did not. It is old school, but it works. At the end of the day, I know the debits and credits match. I don't have to think about it. the debit and the credit, and they zero out. Alright. Alright. So, who's on the budget committee? In this district, we have the board. And then every board, budget committee is obligating themselves to a 3-year term, right? And you, like any board, you have to have a quorum. Okay? So, that's the rules. And once you go from proposed to approved, the budget committee then separates and now goes back to the board. But the roles at the time, you're in the governing body, which is the board and the superintendent, because the superintendent actually just reports to the board, not the rest of the cabinet. We report to him. He's the only employee of the board, so. And then basically, we try to stagger them over a 3-year period, but sometimes that has not worked because people move, people get sick, something happens, and then we got something quite back to back, right? So we do as best we can, but in this district, we have been blessed with board members who want to be a part of the process. Other districts, they struggle to get board members. I think we've done really well with getting them, and I'm very thankful. Right? What do you do? I'm gonna get, Jeannie and I will give you an instrument next Tuesday. And then I don't give it to you in advance, Michael will write his speech and his notes on it, and you can't write it yet because we're not finishing. We just now got the cuts today, and from that, he will be able to finish his speech. But he will give his speech, and then after he's done talking, the rest of the evening on the 22nd will be me going through every line item, similar to what I did on the 18th, going, this is why I have a fluctuation. This is the FTE change. Why do I have so many administration in this fund 1 year, and now I don't have that money? Because when we had extra money, I put just administration moving, not teachers, not classified, because when you go to bargain and you have them all over the place, then they think you're playing widgets with money. I don't like to do that, so I'm very transparent of how I move the money around, right? You have a hearing, once you get to that point, you can have public comment, right? And I would ask, do we have any public comments here? I don't see anybody that's gave me a card, because I know that Andrea's gonna say, 3, did you ask for any public comment? Does anybody have a public comment that's not already here for what you're doing? No, okay, Andrea, I did what you told me to do. Alright. Alright, from that point, you approve the budget, and then you say, thank you, I'll see you next year. And then hopefully, if we have board members exiting, you would think it's such a blissful process, and you may want to be in the board. Okay? We love people to get involved. Alright. Before the first budget meeting, you sit here with me. And if you don't come into this meeting, I ask you to actually come into my office if you can't attend, and you'll sit down with me for an hour or so if you didn't get this training. Because it is important for this training so you can understand what you're going to read. Not anybody can pick up a budget book and say, yeah, I understand it. Yeah, I'm reading it. It is not that. Because you can take my book versus David Douglas. They all are different. That's the unique thing about a budget book. It is 60%, 50% budget law, 50% other is how you want to design it, how you want your district to see how you run your operation. I have a lot of pages that do fluff. She, on the other hand, was like, summary, here you go. That's because how she would do it. But she would get done quicker than I would. Because she doesn't like to talk as much as I do.
So we're not gonna get pictures?
No.
Not in the first meeting.
Okay. So those are the things, and the thing to talk about, if you would have got the budget, and this has happened before for people, if you got a budget document prior to the first budget meeting, you could not talk to your co-members. Nor could you sit in your lunch or table and discuss the budget, because then you would be in violation. All right?
We're all in the air.
Okay, just so you know that. Okay, you'll come on next week. First thing you do, in the instructions, he's gonna start out, and then he immediately is gonna go, who wants to nominate the chair? Then from there, chair is gonna say who wants to be the vice chair. And then he says, thank God, it's not me. He takes away goes away, and the new person starts process. Andrea has it all written on paper, so it's easier to do.
And I'm not mistaken, where there would not be board member.
But it has been the board member before, when we had a lot of new people here.
Yeah.
They were not comfortable
Yeah.
with taking that role, and they were quite quiet. Once they got their wings, they were like, okay, I'm good. But some people don't like to do that.
There are scripts for the chairman.
I'm fine with doing it. It doesn't bother me. Robert's rules are no big.
There you go. Well, you know who to nominate then. When you get this on the 22nd, once the budget, it becomes a budget document, becomes what we need to do. We then make it available, and it will be on the district website, and becomes where people in the public can come see it. Right? But I don't give it to the public before I give it to the board. Cause that's where somebody said, oh, I get to have it. No. The board gets it, the superintendent get it, and then when my meeting's done, it becomes a public document. Okay? Now, I know it is not translated in multiple languages, right? But if somebody wanted to be able to view it, this has come up, you would have to ask, if you are, let's say, translation in Russian, I would have to get an interpreter if they had questions and say this and that. And they would basically go through this training. But for the years I've been doing this, I've asked for other people, I've had translators, they typically don't attend. We try, they just don't. But if they choose to, we have to make those accommodations, right? Okay, the budget message is Michael, not mine. I give him all the messages, all the instruments to put in it, but that's his. Right? He gives his feelings, and he puts a lot more feeling in it than I do. I just give him the number. But it has to be something that he puts out and then delivers it, and then he says, okay, sure you go. And then I do my next piece. Okay? We then ask for public comment after I am done presenting the budget. Not in between when the superintendent and when I start, it's after I do the presentation. We'll ask for public comment. Okay? And hopefully at that point, there's been enough discussion throughout it, then you will be able to hopefully not have a lot of questions after that. But if somebody has not been in the training, comes in and goes, you're Fruit Loop, I don't know what you're saying, then they have the right, and they would have a 3-minute comment, and just like anybody at the normal before that. Okay? Same budget meeting process, Robert's Rules of Order, we have to do the things, there'll have to be minutes taken from those minutes, and I believe Elizabeth will be back by then, she'll be able to write the minutes and take the minutes down. And that minutes is actually part of the budget book in the very last pages of the budget document. You'll see those, and if you ever looked at the last pages, but those are in there. And you have to have those. Alright. Alright. If you have a revision to the budget, which very rarely happens, we would discuss it and why it's being done. Usually if there's a revision, it's due to circumstances I could not control when the money came in, or changes of what I thought. It's not that we typically have forgot it, it's when the timing of the document we received. Or if we got a whole buttload of money and I had to appropriate it so I could spend, or at that point, for me to start spending the energy money, I needed to appropriate it. And it's better to do it at the adoption than this. So just understanding the timing. But it doesn't happen very often. I don't need to explain it for him, I think you all can figure that one out. Okay? You'll get a resolution. As the board chair, whoever chooses to be that, you'll read the resolution. In the resolution, I move the budget committee, and you're gonna say, I approve at this dollar amount for this fiscal year. That's your first resolution. That's an example of what you're doing. You're moving it off of proposed and moving it to approved and handing it off like a baton and said, here you go, now it's your turn, right? Then basically a motion to approve the tax. We have two types of taxes. We have basically the general rates, and then we have the debt rates, right? And those have to be appropriated. And I tried to incorporate them in the first phase of it, so that everybody understands the process of what that's doing. But technically, I do not move those, as I said earlier, those instruments do not go to the taxing commission until the board approves the official adopted budget. Okay? But at that time, you sign those resolutions, and whoever the chair is, you say, thank you, I will see you next year, roughly at the same time, to do the same process, and hopefully there isn't a lot of change in the budget process, and hopefully we may not have to cut. I hope. Okay? Outcomes? You're gonna have a lot of comments, or not. There's gonna be a lot of involvement, and you're gonna ask the questions. You have 2 new people on the committee this year. Asking the questions is extremely helpful. I know as I sit at Owaswell in Oregon, I could have 197 business managers, and somebody would say, anybody have any comments? And they're all like. And then I start, and once I start, everybody goes. Some people are not comfortable with that. You just gotta step out of your comfort zone, right? If you really wanna understand, if I didn't do a good job explaining it, please ask me. There's not many things in this budget, I don't know where the money goes, where it's coming from, how it's gonna transition to wherever I want it to go. Okay? As if you went to the training on the F-18th, you probably said that was way more detailed than the board has ever gotten in their life and tenure as a board. Because their general fund statement is 2 pages long. The documents they got on the 18th was extremely detailed.
Coming from experience, this obviously is open to the question, this will answer it. Yeah, I've been coming to board meetings for a while. And I'm probably going to go and ask the questions. It's always been well received.
If you go to Portland Public, you cannot do that in the public meeting. Okay? You would have to fill out a card and wait your turn. Okay, budget hearing to adopt. Once you hand it off and say, thank you, I appreciate it, now you need to do your part. I then come back, I have to do another public notice. And that public notice, I then say, I have to fill out an ED1, ED50, all those things that are now additional federal, state laws. Submit those to the taxing commission and submit them to the board, and from there we move forward. And if they have questions, we could change, but I try not to change hardly anything to sway it more than 10%. Okay, that's why we spend a lot of time in that proposed phase jockeying where we want it to go, because jockeying at the end, one, drives that person crazy, because once they've had to put it in their book and in the software, moving it around is not an easy process.
One change can cause 17 different entries to have to be made. So that's why I get super frustrated when we didn't want to take that person out of the budget, let's put her back.
Which I did today, and she didn't throw a pin at me, so that was good. But that's why we try to really overthink, are we taking that person? Right, because one of the critics of the meeting the other day is, why do we know, what do we know why is it this? Because I didn't know all the widgets at the time. If I don't know all the widgets, it's very unfair to take, I'm gonna take $5 million, which was 4.8, and I'm gonna cut all this, this, and this. But it ended up not being 4.8, we're at this number. So if I would have told them that, now they're pissed off because I put them in hyper mode and they think they're gonna lose their job, and they may not. So it's not fair to them because they can't sit in all the meetings. So I know everybody wants to be involved. And they're welcome to when I retire, which is very simple. All right. We adopt it, and that's when our fund starts again. We then have to take everything that we built in that software and now download it and redevelop it into what the state wants. And it takes Jeannie several days because things air out. And if it does, and then if it doesn't match the resolution, which one didn't do the last time, they have this new transparency department. I get an error and then I have to respond to them to tell them what it's legally where it's need to be. Well, I sent them my audit report and said, actually, this is the audit report you need to follow, not yours, follow mine. And then immediately they passed. But we have to jump a lot of hoops these days because of the new House Bill 144. Just loving that one. All right. And we can talk about the budget book. It has multiple sections, and these are required by the state, not Sheree, but by the state and by the Fed. You have to have an executive session. That's basically the superintendent, and that's a high overview. Hey, tell me what the district is, what, blah, 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 right? That's what that is. What's your mission and goals? What are you gonna do, right? With teaching new principals and new administrators over the years, I take the first 2 sections of the budget book and say, screw the rest of it, take this section and take the very last section of it. If you read that, you're going to get more brownie points being a principal than you'll ever get anywhere else, because you actually understand how the money goes to and from. That's what these first 2 sections do. They're going to show you how I do the budget, what process I go through, where the funding sources are, what are the high level things. If somebody say, give me the clip notes, because I got out of college that way, I bought a lot of clip notes because I didn't want to go to class, and I passed the test. That's basically what this is. I didn't cheat. I just bought clip notes. All right. Basically, we went in the fund structure. I have 21 funds. I talk about them, right? In the budget book, after those first 2 sections, then you're going to go into that financial section, and it's going to take 1 page that has resources, which is revenue, 1 page, 2 pages, or 3 pages, which is going to tell you what your function are, and then you're going to have another section that's going to tell you what your objects are. And X, they all have to tie. They can't have one balance than the other, right? Which is one of the reasons we got this new software, because if you change something in one fund in the old software, it was a lot of work to go back and review it and to get caught. Hopefully, not right now, because the software is pretty pukey for Jeannie right now. We like to throw it out the window, but hopefully in the future, it will be better. But she's doing a fantastic job, and hopefully she doesn't throw me up. We'll go, okay. All right. This is what a financial statement looks like. It might look a little bit different when you get it this next time, right? But at the end, you basically have to have 2 actuals of prior year. Okay, then you have to have the current year adopted or amended. Then you have to have 3 columns for the current year you're trying to adopt. Proposed, approved, and adopt. Okay, and that's how the budget book has to go. 1 page for revenue. The expenses will have 2 different sections, one on functions and one on objects. That's basically how it reads. Now, this layout, when you go look at Beaverton's, it's not laid out the same way. Remember what I said? The law says I have to put 2 actuals and this and that. They chose to do it differently, right? I don't really care, but I just have to follow the law. Okay? So when you get this maybe next week and we can't figure out how to do the download of reports so it's legible, Sheree is going to have to type them in myself, and you'll basically have 3 pages for each one of the funds for me to be in compliance with the state budget law. Okay. I hope it doesn't go to that, because I do not think he nearly as well as Jeannie. So, all right. Basically, more way to look at it. How to read it, like I said, take the first 2 sections, the executive and information, and understand, because that's going to tell you when the district was created, how they make it. That's going to be his missions. Why did I cut this versus this, right? Why did I take furlough days instead of cutting a lot of people? Well, I have to have a contract in it that's agreed upon before I can do furlough days. And if I have to amend and actually present a budget next week, I don't have time to get a contract. So I have to find another way to balance the budget. Those are the kind of little prickly things that fall requires you to do. Okay? I like this. Thank Jeannie, Kristen, they're not here. Jeannie's here, Kristen's not here, she's the payroll person. Elizabeth is the new accountant. She didn't get to experience this today, but hopefully she'll do this in the future. And she'll be here the week that I'm not here. And Miss Sharon, she does AP and tells me when I can't do things, and no, I can't use my visa. She tells me a lot. So, but any questions?
Thank you all.
Thank you. This was great.
Basic question with the process of obviously everyone getting access to the budget next week, right? Is there anything in like the in any of the CBAs with the means of if they're dealing with that, have like response time and like give feedback and stuff like that? Just wondering if that.
Yeah, more particular to, I think the tougher thing for the budget committee is that our recommendations for reduction in spending is the most significant amount of staffing reductions. And more so than we've seen, this board has seen in the past. So we have to notify our certified teachers union by May 1st of whether or not. And so I think one thing I'll be upfront about that I've been sharing with you folks publicly is that you will not see a proposal of further raises in this budget that Sheree presents. However, we are asking our labor groups if there's interest in that. But I also know that there's rumor out there that potentially the governor is going to execute an executive order that schools will handle. If that comes to be true, then that potentially is not an option. They vote ultimately furlough days or days we don't pay everyone collectively. And that's not popular in every school district because sometimes labor groups are like, nope, we don't want to give that up, but they're an interest expressed. However, if that's, for instance, not negotiated by May 1st, we will execute the budget at Sheree is presented, and then provide the reduction to notices for the staff for that. With the classified union, it's 2 weeks notice, but we try to get notice out.
When you're at the person's mark biennium, not this year, the following year, sometimes the governor and then they wait until the very last minute to make decisions. School districts cannot turn my share deck. We have to be able to put things in place. So several times since I've been here, we've had to adopt what we in good faith thought was the decision. And then let's say mid-July, oh, this is the decision. We then had to turn around and do something. But the biggest thing that doesn't affect us is ensuring that I can appropriate taxes. And that means I appropriate for debt levels and I appropriate for my basically my general rate. If I can do that, I'm feeling safe that this district is at least gonna have a revenue source. If other things change, which they always do, I don't worry about it as long as I can make sure that I appropriate taxes and I can ensure that everybody's gonna be able to get paid because I will have a revenue. If the board holds, and I've had several people I've had to teach and board over the years saying, you cannot hold this up because you're arguing over 72 cents or $70 cents because you want that. That's not your role. You have to do that. And if not, your employees won't get paid and then you won't be an organization because you became arbitral. And it has happened. Not here, but it does happen. Brittany or Britton, do you have any questions?
Nope. Thank you for
No.
a thorough presentation.
Well, this is about a third of what you're gonna get. So.
Feeling pretty good about it so far. Thank you, Sheree.
All right, And if you couldn't hear the video, please take it home, pull that link up, it does explain compression, measure 50 and measure 5 really well. And if you've never gone through your property tax bill and understood how this ebb and flow goes, take 2 to 3 years and look at your property tax statements in relation to those couple slides, and it will be seamless for you to understand. It really is. And I use that similar approach when we were trying for the levy. Well, I can tell them, it says, when you see this decimal, then, and that doesn't fluctuate, every year that decimal will go down if I keep paying my debt. Now, if that goes down, that means you pay less. So those were the kind of things we were talking about. But it didn't happen. There we go. All right, thank you, and now you can swash it a little bit on. Well,
Oh.
there. All right, we're done. Thanks, guys.